My name is Rowan Gray, and on behalf of the Workers' Rights Student Coalition at Columbia Law School, I'd like to welcome everyone in attendance as well as those who are watching online. I'd like to very much thank at the outset our co-sponsors for their support in making this series and this particular event possible, the Levy Institute of Economics at Bard College, the Institute for New Economic Thinking, the Richard Paul Richmond Center for the Study of Business Law and Public Policy at Columbia Law School, the Institute for Global Legal Transformation at Columbia Law School, the Columbia Hellenic Students Association, the Columbia Society of International Law, and my colleagues in the Workers' Rights Student Coalition. Special thank you to Columbia University and Columbia Law School for graciously hosting this event and hosting everybody in tonight, and in particular to the members of SYRIZA New York and Natasha Romanu for her work in coordinating and helping make this possibility. So this year, the Workers' Rights Student Coalition, in conjunction with over 10 other student organizations at Columbia Law School, has introduced Modern Money and Public Purpose, which is an interdisciplinary seminar series exploring contemporary issues in law and political economics. The series was conceived in response to the calamitous global economic crisis of the last 5 years and aims to provide an open forum for students, academics and professionals, as well as members of the general public, to learn about institutional and legal structures that underpin the global economy and to discuss cutting-edge ideas that further the progressive goals of equality, social justice and full economic participation. In particular related to this event, last October we held a seminar here on the Eurozone crisis featuring the Institute of New Economic Thinking scholar Marshall Auerbach, economics professor Yiannis Varoufakis and Columbia Law professor Georges Ujo, which focused on the respective role of design defects and policy failures in contributing to the current state of the Eurozone crisis. Tonight, we're very fortunate to be able to revisit the Eurozone crisis with an on-the-ground perspective provided by top political leadership of the Greek official opposition party SYRIZA, or in English, the Coalition of the Radical Left, the Unitary Social Front, including the leader of the party, Alexis Tsipras, who is the youngest leader of the opposition in the history of Greece. Since the Euro crisis began, Mr. Tsipras and SYRIZA have consistently opposed austerity measures while maintaining a strong commitment to the vision of a unified Europe. Tonight we'll learn about and discuss their vision for achieving this goal. We will be dividing the bulk of the evening into two panel discussions, the first focusing on redesigning the Eurozone and the second focusing on domestic plans for economic recovery in Greece. We will also have an open discussion at the end of the evening with Mr. Tsipras, during which time we will incorporate questions from the audience. So if you have a question, please use the paper provided in front of you, and we'll collect those questions during the break, and we will ask those questions to the extent that time provides. And just a quick note about housekeeping with the panels. In order to show an active discussion among participants, I as moderator will be enforcing strict times, and also with regards to questions. So please, for the participants and the audience, please don't get upset if I interrupt or cut someone off. We're just trying to keep within the time frame, particularly now that we're a little bit behind schedule. So if you can hold on, please, we'll just wait a little bit more, and hopefully Mr. Tsipras will be here soon to provide opening remarks. Thank you.
So thank you in advance. I'm going to speak in my language, in Greek language, and George will make the translation. And I want to thank you for your presentation here. We are very happy to be here in front of you. Η επίσκεψή μας στις Ηνωμένες Πολιτείες Αμερικής έχει ήδη αποδειχθεί ιδιαίτερα χρήσιμη, τόσο για μας, όσο και για πολλούς και πολλές οι οποίοι είχαν ακούσει για το ΣΥΡΙΖΑ από τρίτους, όχι από εμάς απευθείας, και τώρα αξιοποίησαν τη δυνατότητα να μας δουν και να μας γνωρίσουν, να μας ακούσουν από κοντά, χωρίς τις διαμεσολαβήσεις που καμιά φορά υπόκεινται στον παραμορφωτικό φακό της πολιτικής σκοπιμότητας.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I think that our visit in the United States has already been proven very useful, both for us as well as for many of you who have heard about SYRIZA from third persons and now have the possibility to listen and see us directly. without any intermediaries who sometimes deform our sayings because of political reasons.
Σε αντίθεση με τις Ηνωμένες Πολιτείες Αμερικής, όπου έγινε επιλογή χρηματοπιστωτικής επέκτασης από την πρώτη στιγμή της κρίσης το 2008, στην Ευρώπη επιλέχθηκε ο δρόμος των σκληρών προγραμμάτων της λιτότητας για την αντιμετώπιση της κρίσης. Και ιδιαίτερα η Ελλάδα αντιμετωπίστηκε ως πειραματικός σωλήνας εφαρμογής βάρβαρων νεοφιλελεύθερων πολιτικών.
To the contrary to what has happened in the United States, where the crisis has been dealt through financial stimulus, Europe has chosen the path of austerity measures to deal with the crisis. Particularly Greece has been dealt like a guinea pig, like a laboratory of implementation of barbarous neoliberal choices.
Αυτή τη στιγμή που σας μιλώ, στην Ελλάδα, οι υγιείς επιχειρήσεις κλείνουν, εκπαιδευμένοι άνθρωποι φεύγουν από τη χώρα, όχι γιατί είναι τεμπέληδες, όπως πολλοί θέλαν να πούν αρχικά, αλλά γιατί το πιστωτικό σύστημα έχει σταματήσει να λειτουργεί και το κράτος αντί να βοηθά, υπονομεύει τις δυνατότητες ανάπτυξης.
This very moment in Greece, businesses are closing down and trained people are leaving the country, not because they are lazy, but because our financial system has stopped working and the state, instead of helping growth, undermines it.
Οι τράπεζες μας δεν μπορούν ούτε να δανειστούν, ούτε να δανείσουν. Παρόλο που επρόκειται για τραπεζικό σύστημα το οποίο έχει εκτεθεί στον υπερδανεισμό στα στεγαστικά δάνεια και στις τιτλοποιήσεις, από όπου και ξεκίνησε η κρίση. Και αυτός ο φαύλος κύκλος επεκτείνεται όλο ένα και πιο γρήγορα.
Our banks are not in a position to lend money or to find any money for them. Though it is a banking system that has been open to overborrowing and overlending for housing for mortgages, and this is the point where this crisis started.
Η Ελλάδα,
And this is a vicious circle, It spins more and more quickly.
We are very sorry, but we lost our translator.
I'm just replacing a Neil guy.
So, η Ελλάδα έχει μετατραπεί σε μια χώρα αναφορά, σε ένα key study, για όποιον θέλει να μελετήσει το πώς η πολιτική της ύφεσης καταστρέφει το κοινωνικό ιστό.
So Greece has been transformed in a case study for whoever would like to study how the recession policy destroys what we call social tissue.
Για όποιον θέλει να δει πώς μια κυβέρνηση καταφέρνει να προστατεύσει τους μεγάλους φοροφυγάδες που έχουν καταθέσει στις τράπεζες του εξωτερικού.
For whoever would like how austerity programs are working and are incapable to resolve our debt problem, for whoever would like to see how a government manages to protect big tax evaders who have deposited their money in banks abroad, then
η επικρατούσα άποψη είναι ότι ο κύκλος της ύφεσης στην Ελλάδα ξεκίνησε εξαιτίας του υπερδανισμού του ελληνικού κράτους κατά την περίοδο που προηγήθηκε του κράκ του 2008.
The prevailing view is that the circle of recession in Greece began simply because the Greek state started to have to borrow too much money during the period that preceded the crisis of 2008.
Ωστόσο, από πλευράς ανάλυσης, αυτό δεν βοηθά στην προσπάθειά μας να κατανοήσουμε τα αίτια της κρίσης.
Nevertheless, from an analysis point of view, this does not help to understand the reasons of the crisis.
Είναι σαν να λέμε ότι ένας άνθρωπος, ένας ασθενής που πάσχει από καρκίνο πονάει. Αυτό όμως μπορεί πράγματι να ισχύει, όμως η συγκεκριμένη παρατήρηση δεν μπορεί να εξηγήσει τι είναι ακριβώς αυτό που προκάλεσε τον καρκίνο, τι τύπο καρκίνο έχει και ποια θεραπεία μπορεί να βοηθήσει την ίασή του.
It's like if we say that a patient that has cancer feels pain. This can be, of course, valid. Nevertheless, this remark cannot explain what really caused cancer, what kind of cancer the patient has, and what is the treatment that could help him to overcome it.
Το χρέος, όπως και ο πόνος, είναι το σύμπτωμα ενός βαθύτερου προβλήματος. Δεν είναι η αιτία όμως.
Death as well as pain are the symptoms of a deeper problem. They are not the root causes of that problem.
Ωστόσο, αν δούμε τα στοιχεία, χρονιά με τη χρονιά, όπως αυτά ήταν διαθέσιμα ανά έτος, αυτά που χρησιμοποιούσαν όσοι λάμβαναν κρίσιμες αποφάσεις, το ερώτημα δεν είναι ο υπερδανισμός του δημοσίου.
Nevertheless, if we focus on the data that were year after year were available, all those people who use that data to take decisions, then we come to the conclusion, then we understand that the issue is not that the Greek state borrowed too much money.
Το χρέος ως ποσοστό του ελληνικού ακαθάριστου εγχώριου προϊόντος είχε διατηρηθεί γύρω από το ποσοστό του 100%, λίγο πάνω, λίγο κάτω, καθ' όλη τη διάρκεια, καθ' όλη τη δεκαετία, από το 1998 ως το 2008, δηλαδή τα χρόνια της ανάπτυξης.
Debt, the Greek debt as a percentage of the Greek GDP has been stable around 100% all over the decades before 2008, that is during the years of growth.
Αλλά αυτό που είναι παράδοξο είναι ότι την ίδια περίοδο, ενώ οι ρυθμοί ανάπτυξης ήταν πάρα πολύ υψηλοί, όπως μετριέται από την ονομαστική αύξηση του ακαθάριστου εγχώριου προϊόντος ανά έτος, έφταναν μέχρι και το 10%, το χρέος παρέμενε σταθερό ως προς το ποσοστό, ως προς το ακαθάριστο εγχώριο προϊόν. Παρά το γεγονός ότι η κοινή λογική λέει ότι ενώ είχαμε αυξητικούς ρυθμούς ανάπτυξης, θα έπρεπε το χρέος να μειώνεται.
But what it is really strange is that this very same period, while the rate of growth of the Greek economy was positive, if we were to calculate the nominal growth, the nominal increase of our GDP every year, then these growth rates were almost 10%. for example, 2003. Our debt stayed stable as a percentage of our GDP. And this is contrary to common sense, which says that when we have growth, then public debt can be reduced.
Στην αρχή έγινε μια προσπάθεια αυτό να δικαιολογηθεί με το τέχνασμα ότι το χρέος παρέμενε σταθερό επειδή δήθεν υπήρχαν υπερβολικές δημόσιες δαπάνες. Ωστόσο, οι δημόσιες δαπάνες, αν αφαιρέσουμε τους τόκους, ήταν μικρότερες ως ποσοστό του ΑΕΠ από τον μέσο όρο της Ευρωζώνης.
In the beginning, there was an effort to explain this by saying that our debt was a stable percentage simply because we had too many public spending. Nevertheless, our public spending, if we take out the interest, were less as a percentage of the GDP by the average of the Eurozone.
Αντίθετα, εκεί όπου υπήρχε πραγματικά απόκλιση ήταν στα έσοδα από την φορολογία του πλούτου και του κεφαλαίου, δηλαδή στην άμεση φορολόγηση των υψηλών εισοδημάτων.
On the contrary, where we had a real deviation was in public revenues, and especially in revenues from taxation of the wealth and of taxation of the capital, the direct taxation of high income.
So, if you have your help, it's better because we are very, very tired for the trip. It was a full trip today, so yours is very tired. So.
Can only
Okay.
imagine.
You have. Okay. We are very sorry. We will continue. Συνεπώς, η αιτία του υψηλού χρέους στην Ελλάδα είναι το γεγονός ότι υποφορολογήθηκε το μεγάλο κεφάλαιο. Και αυτό αποδεικνύεται από τα σκάνδαλα που έχουν προκύψει τώρα με τις λίστες των φοροφυγάδων, τις λίστες Λαγκάρτ, με το γεγονός ότι οι τράπεζες όταν έβγαζαν δισεκατομμύρια πλήρωναν πάρα πολύ μικρούς τόκους, με τις offshore εταιρείες και τις ενδοομιλικές συναλλαγές.
The trouble in reality rests with the fact that when it came to tax revenues, they were much lower precisely because there was no taxation, no adequate taxation that was leveraged on the wealth, that was taxing capital and capital income, and the upper income distribution incomes. All of this is coming to the forefront at the moment. There is a lot of discussion with the Lagarde list, banks that were able to generate billions, but in reality they were paying only 7% of what they should have paid. It is also very clear that offshore companies were able to hide away income that should have been taxed.
Έχουμε υπολογίσει ότι αν τα έσοδα από τη φορολογία στην Ελλάδα ήταν κοντά στο μέσο όρο της Ευρωζώνης, θα αντιμετωπίζαμε την κρίση του 2008 με χρέος μικρότερο, σε ποσοστό του ΑΕΠ βέβαια, από αυτό της Γερμανίας, δηλαδή γύρω στο 80% του ΑΕΠ.
We have estimated that had the tax revenue been close to the average of the Eurozone, at this time of when the crisis erupted in 2008, Greece would have had a smaller deficit in fact, a smaller debt, forgive me for that, meaning it would have been roughly around 80% of GDP. The debt to GDP ratio would have been at 80%.
Και εδώ αναδεικνύεται ένα θέμα που νομίζω ότι απασχολεί και εσάς εδώ στις ΗΠΑ. Και πρόσφατα νομίζω ότι το έχει θέσει και ο γνωστός σε όλους μας Αμερικανός οικονομολόγος, ο Πολ Κρούγκμαν. Ότι το ζήτημα τελικά είναι ταξικό. Θα πληρώσουν οι πλούσιοι αυτά που τους αναλογούν, ώστε να διατηρηθούν οι δομές του κοινωνικού κράτους, ή θα διαλύσουμε τις δομές του κοινωνικού κράτους επειδή οι πλούσιοι αρνούνται να πληρώσουν και το πολιτικό σύστημα βεβαίως δεν τους ζητά να πληρώσουν φόρους.
Here arises a terribly important issue that has preoccupied also your society. As Paul Krugman, the Nobel laureate, recently said, there is a class issue behind this discussion. Here one can start with the following question. Are we going to force those that are wealthy to pay into the tax revenue what they should and what they ought to be paying, so that we can continue with a social welfare state, or are we going to eliminate the social welfare state precisely because we want to shield off those that are not contributing where it is their duty rightfully to pay into the system and contribute as well?
Στην Ελλάδα λοιπόν επιλέχθηκε να μειωθούν οι κοινωνικές δαπάνες από το να πληρώσουν οι πλούσιοι. Να μειωθούν οι κοινωνικές δαπάνες, οι μισθοί, τα κοινωνικά και οικονομικά δικαιώματα των εργαζόμενων, των συνταξιούχων, και αυτό έγινε πολύ πριν εκδηλωθεί η κρίση και ακολουθήθηκε και μετά ως μέσο διαχείρισης της κρίσης.
In Greece, the choice was very clearly to reduce spending on social provisioning, to reduce wages, and in general to diminish the social and economic rights of working people and of the pensioners before even the crisis erupted. But they continued using the same tools as soon as the crisis erupted, and they have continued doing so ever since.
Την ίδια στιγμή, η φοροδιαφυγή και οι φοροαπαλλαγές για τους πλούσιους δημιούργησαν λιγότερα έσοδα και αύξηση του χρέους. Όμως, κατά την άποψή μας, η βασική αιτία της κρίσης βρίσκεται στην ίδια τη δομή της Ευρωζώνης. Ο λόγος είναι διπλός. Οι χώρες μας είναι μέρος μιας κακώς σχεδιασμένης νομισματικής ένωσης και συγχρόνως η πολιτική που προκρίθηκε από την Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση για να διαχειριστεί την κρίση του 2008 έβλεπε την ύφεση ως θεραπεία.
At the same time, tax evasion and the tax exemptions, the legal tax exemptions that favored the wealthy, kept producing and creating and adding to the problem of increasing and ever-increasing debt. Yet, a basic cause of the crisis is deeply rooted in the very structure of the Eurozone. There are two reasons that need to be considered. First, our countries are a part of a badly designed monetary union. And at the same time, the political structures that the political response, I would say, that was privileged from the side of the European Union in order to manage the current crisis that erupted in 2008, singularly focused on the a policy of austerity as the remedy for the trouble that was erupting.
Επιτρέψτε μου να πω δύο λόγια για το πώς λειτουργήσε η Νομισματική Ένωση. Η Νομισματική Ένωση έκανε δύο πράγματα. Αφαίρεσε από τις οικονομίες την ικανότητα να απορροφήσουν ένα σοκ σε περίπτωση που μας χτυπήσει μια παγκόσμια ή περιφερειακή κρίση, όπως και έγινε, και φρόντισε ώστε όταν ήρθε τελικά αυτό το σοκ να είναι πολύ μεγαλύτερο, η επίδρασή του να είναι πολύ μεγαλύτερη από ό,τι πραγματικά θα έπρεπε να είναι. Και γιατί ήταν μεγαλύτερο? Επειδή κατά τη διάρκεια των καλών εποχών η Νομισματική Ένωση της Ευρώπης οδήγησε σε γιγαντιαίες ροές κεφαλαίων από τις πλεονασματικές χώρες στις ελληματικές. Οι ροές δημιούργησαν φούσκες που με τη σειρά τους δημιούργησαν την εντύπωση της ανάπτυξης, της μεγέθυνσης και της προόδου.
Let me say a few words about the European Monetary Union. How and why is it problematic? First of all, it removed from the economies, the national economies, the ability to absorb a shock, an economic shock, that had the potential of erupting at any time due to global processes or due to European Union specific processes. In addition, it put in place a system so that when the shock arrived, it unfortunately became much bigger. Why bigger? How did this come about? This is because during the period of prosperity, the European Union led to immense inflows of capital from the surplus countries into the deficit countries. These inflows, these capital inflows, resulted in bubbles that in their turn produced this impression of development, of growth, of progress, when it was really based on these inflows. It was not part of the economy itself.
Ωστόσο, εδώ συνέβαλε ο δεύτερος παράγοντας ώστε να οδηγηθούμε στην καταστροφή. Αυτός έχει να κάνει με την ευρωπαϊκή διαχείριση της κρίσης. Αυτή διαμορφώθηκε μετά τον Οκτώβριο του 2008 και θα θυμάστε, φαντάζομαι, τις συγκρούσεις στις συνόδους των G20 μεταξύ των ΗΠΑ τότε και των ηγεμονικών δυνάμεων στην Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση. Για να μην σας κουράσω με γνωστά πράγματα, θα σας θυμίζω μόνο ότι ο προεδρεύων τότε της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης, ο Τσέχος πρωθυπουργός, ο κ. Τοπόλανεκ, είχε χαρακτηρίσει την επιλογή Ομπάμα να αυξήσει τα ελλείμματα για να αναχαιτιστεί η αύξηση της ανεργίας ως το δρόμο προς την κόλαση. Και αυτή η ρίση συνόψιζε, νομίζω, με τον καλύτερο τρόπο την αντίληψη που υπερίσχυσε τελικά στην Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση για την αντιμετώπιση της κρίσης.
Having said this, there is a second very important reason that led to this disaster that has taken place. This has to do with the specific manner in which the management of the crisis itself was handled. This developed around October of 2008, and we should all remember that there were powerful conflicts that were taking place in difference of opinion during the G20 meeting between the United States and the dominant powers within the European Union. I don't want to I do not want to become repetitive and exhaust your patience with very well-known events. I would simply like to reiterate that back then, the president of the European Union, Mr. Topolanek, had said about the choices of the Obama administration, which where the choice was simply to utilize counter-cyclical policy and to allow the deficit to increase so as to hold back, to put a buffer on the increase in unemployment. He said that this was the road to hell. This sentence, in my mind, summarizes and characterizes astutely precisely the mentality that won the day in the European Union.
Κατά την άποψή μας, η επικρατούσα άποψη στην Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση ήταν να αντιμετωπιστεί η κρίση ως ένα φόβητρο, ως ένα εργαλείο πίεσης, τρομοκράτησης, για να εφαρμοστούν πολιτικές και να επιταχυνθούν μεταρρυθμίσεις που είχαν επιχειρήσει και παλιότερα να επιβάλλουν νεοφιλελεύθερες μεταρρυθμίσεις, αλλά ήταν πολιτικά δύσκολο να επιβληθούν.
This decision was used, in effect, this decision about the recession was used as a tool so that a series of neoliberal changes, neoliberal policies could be fast-tracked in the European Union. Policies that during the previous years were in fact much harder. They had begun already, but it was much, much harder to impose with such rapid pace as now became possible because of the crisis.
Στην Ελλάδα, το κράτος δεν χρεοκόπησε άμεσα, παρόλο που είχε δανειστεί σε πολύ μεγάλο βαθμό. Η οικονομική ύφεση στην Ελλάδα ξεκινά μετά την υπογραφή του πρώτου μνημονίου, ξεκινά δηλαδή από το καλοκαίρι του 2010. Μια συμφωνία στην οποία υπό αδιευκρίνητες συνθήκες οδηγηθήκαμε, ενώ ένα μήνα πριν είχαμε δανειστεί μέσω ομολόγων με επιτόκιο 6%, όταν η Ιταλία και η Ισπανία κρατήθηκαν εκτός μνημονίου, πληρώνοντας για ένα χρόνο γύρω στο 7%. Αν παρακολουθήσετε την πορεία των spreads, θα δείτε ότι δεν ακολούθησαν ανωδική πορεία από το 2008. Πρώτα αυξήθηκαν την εποχή που λεγόταν ότι δεν θα υπάρξει βοήθεια σε καμιά χώρα της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης. Μετά μειώθηκαν όταν έγιναν δηλώσεις ότι θα λειτουργήσει η κοινοτική αλληλεγγύη και μετά ξανααυξήθηκαν όταν διευκρινίστηκε ότι η κοινοτική αλληλεγγύη θα ήταν μόνο στα λόγια ή θα ήταν με όρους μνημονίου. Και στη συνέχεια οι επενδυτές χρεοκόπησαν την Ελλάδα, με δύο λόγια δηλαδή, την οδήγησαν εκτός αγορών.
In Greece, the state did not enter a bankruptcy, did not become bankrupt immediately, although it had borrowed quite a lot in the past. It is the economic downturn, it is the economic recession in Greece that begins with the signing of the first memorandum the first bailout agreement that begins in the summer of 2010. This was an agreement within which, without transparency, without all the specific conditions being obvious at the beginning, we were led within a month earlier. We had borrowed at 6% interest rate when Italy and Spain were not involved at all in bailout agreements, paying for 1 year roughly around 7%. If you were to follow the trends of the spreads at that time, you would see very clearly that they were not increasing rapidly, at least since the beginning of 2008. They started increasing during the period that they were saying that the rumor was that there will not be, in fact, any help for any of the European Union countries. Following that, we could see that there was a drop, in fact, in the spreads when the pronouncements of social solidarity, replaced the previous mantra of no help, no support for the European Union countries that were in trouble. Then we go to yet another phase where they start increasing, when it became clear that solidarity within the European Union was going to stay only in, was not really going to be implemented. It was going to come into existence only to the degree that a country would accept all the conditionalities that were part of the agreement for a bailout. Following that, it is the investors that entered bankruptcy. Soon after, the whole country entered bankruptcy.
Δεδομένης της δομής της Ευρωζώνης, όπου τα έθνη κράτη δεν έχουν από πίσω τους μια κεντρική τράπεζα για να μπορεί να αποτελέσει ως δανειστή ίστα της καταφυγής, έπρεπε να βάλουν τα ίδια πλάτη στις χρεοκοπημένες τους τράπεζες. Και οι τράπεζες έπρεπε να συνεχίσουν τη χρηματοδότηση των χρεοκοπημένων κρατών. Ήταν λοιπόν αναπόφευκτο ότι η θανάσιμη αγκαλιά μεταξύ αφαιρέγγιων τραπεζών και αφαιρέγγιων κρατών θα οδηγούσε πολύ σύντομα σε αυτό που οι οικονομολόγοι ονόμασαν φαινόμενο ντόμινο.
Given the structure of the Eurozone, according to which there is no central bank, as you very well know, there is no central bank in each country. What that means is that the European Central Bank must intervene, since each country does not have a central bank of her own. Whenever the banks needed to continue providing credit and support for the countries, in the countries that were in bankruptcy or were facing problems that could lead to bankruptcy, it was set, given this structure, that the banks, that the individual banks, commercial banks and other banks that were not strong enough that needed essentially recapitalization, and the fact that we did not have a central bank were going to lead eventually to what was called the domino effect.
Κλείνοντας, θέλω να σας πω το εξής. Το συμπέρασμα από όσα σας περιγράφω, από όσα προσπάθησα να σας περιγράψω, είναι ότι η Ευρώπη δυστυχώς δεν έλαβε κανένα μάθημα από τα παθήματα της ιστορίας. Από τα παθήματα της κρίσης του 1929, που μας δίδαξαν ότι αν η πολιτική τάξη αποτύχει να αντιμετωπίσει τις συνέπειες της οικονομικής κατάρρευσης και η οικονομική κάμψη μετατραπεί σε ύφεση, τότε πολύ γρήγορα αυτό που βλέπουμε είναι την άνοδο της ιδεολογίας του μίσους και την επιστροφή των Ναζί στο προσκήνιο και στο κοινοβούλιο. Και στο κοινοβούλιο της Ελλάδας, της χώρας μου, είμαστε υποχρεωμένοι κάθε μέρα να καθόμαστε απέναντι από μία πτέρυγα νεοναζί βουλευτών που προωθούν τον αντισημιτισμό και χαιρετούν τον ναζιστικό χαιρετισμό. Και αν βρίσκομαι σήμερα ανάμεσά σας, ένας από τους λόγους είναι ότι σε μια παγκοσμιοποιημένη οικονομία δεν μπορείς να απομονώσεις τον ιό της ύφεσης σε μια μόνο χώρα και σε μια μόνο ήπειρο. Ούτε μπορείς να απομονώσεις τις κοινωνικές συνέπειες και τους κινδύνους από την επάνωδο των ιδεολογιών του μίσους.
In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I have described that Europe, unfortunately, has not learned any lessons from history. If we look at the lessons that should have been learned from the crisis of 1929, we would have understood that if the political class, the politicians, the political rulers fail miserably in handling the consequences of an economic deterioration, and if a downturn becomes a recession, if a recession becomes a depression, then Nazi ideology will not fall too far behind. They will soon come and they will enter our parliaments. And in the parliament of my country, we are obligated at this time to sit every single day next to a section where in that section you will find Nazis, criminal elements that are abiding by and promote anti-Semitism, and they salute very much the same way as Adolf Hitler did. If I'm here today among you, one of the reasons is that in a global crisis, it is not possible to isolate the infection of that arises from a recession in one country, not in one country and not in one continent.
So, I believe that we have common interests to work together in common targets, to work and to fight against the strategy of recession, to work and to fight the social disaster, the ideas of hate, in both the two sides of Atlantic. And I believe that we have to do a lot. We have to do a lot because this is a crucial time, also in Europe and also in America, United States. And I believe that the first of all that we have to do is to protect democracy against fascism and to protect social cohesion. This is our historical mission. Thank you very much, and I'm very sorry about the translation.
So we'll try and get a little bit back on track now, and we'll introduce the panelists while we've got one coming sitting down. On my far left, I have Professor Matthew Forstater from the University of Missouri, Kansas City, who's also the director of the Center of Full Employment and Price Stability. Then we've got Professor Katharina Pistor from Columbia Law School, who's also the director of the Center of Global Legal Transformation. On my far right, I've got Thomas Ferguson, who's the director of research programs at the Institute for New Economic Thinking. And then to my left, I have Yiannis Milios, who is one of the top economic advisors to SYRIZA and a member of the political secretariat of Synaspismos, and a professor of political economy at the National Technical University of Athens. And then to my right, I have Ms. Rena, Dourou, a member of Greek Parliament and critic of the opposition for foreign relations and European issues. So we're going to change a little bit the format up, and I think I'd like to just get responses from the panelists now, just on the basis of Mr. Tsipras' remarks, and then from there we'll ask the two members from SYRIZA to respond. So does any of the three panelists have a response they'd like to start with? Oh, you don't have to. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much for being able to join me on the panel. I really feel privileged to do so. Let me just, for the sake of transparency, declare that I'm German, although I don't necessarily share the opinions of my government in all respects. The few remarks I'm going to say I've recently presented in Frankfurt, so one can talk about these issues there as well. What I want to talk about are more the structural issues of European financial markets and global financial markets, and I think this dovetails nicely with the presentations we've just heard. I think one has to place the Greek crisis in the context of the structure of global and European financial markets. There are undoubtedly specific Greek issues that have to be resolved, and I think that is up for the Greek people to do. They also have to be able to make some commitments to the outside world that they will do that. But we also have to, again, place the country into the context of a global crisis because it plays itself out there. So here, just a couple of punchlines. I believe that it is a fallacy for the European Union to think that the key issue about the financial crisis is a question of austerity and discipline in economic or legal terms. The problem is that we are living with a financial system that has been structured legally to be highly volatile. It is volatile once because we allow a lot of refinancing and have structured the financial system so it's increasingly dependent on refinancing. And we, of course, live in a world of uncertainty where our expectations that we can refinance at a reasonable rate in the future don't always hold true. The problem is that we structure the financial system with legal commitments that are designed for each participant to be fully enforceable. But if we enforce all legal commitments as they were written ex ante, even though the world around us has changed, the financial system will self-destruct. So the problem with legal discipline is a paradoxical one. On the one hand, we need legal discipline to build viable financial markets, and on the other hand, if we enforce all legal commitments, contractual, regulatory, or legal, law-wise, we will self-destruct the financial system. And we don't allow that to happen. And we saw in the financial crisis that we actually do not allow this to happen, because what happens in a crisis, we suspend the full force of the law. But we don't suspend it for all in equal terms. We suspend the full force of the law, make it more elastic at the core of the financial system where we're trying to rescue it, but we're still enforcing it full force on the periphery. So whether you are on the periphery or at the core of the financial system depends very much on your fate in the global crisis or in the European crisis. And Greece, by that account, certainly is on the periphery. In other countries, there were resources to stabilize the financial system, and all countries suffered deeply. And they fared, in the end, much better than others. So what we have to deal with is this hierarchical structure of global financial system, where in times of crisis, the suspension of the law affects different entities, countries, and people quite differently. And this creates, of course, inequalities and structural problems in the long term. And the key problem is this cannot be resolved simply by writing even better rules and making them more enforceable. What we need to address are the deep structures of the volatility of financial systems, and because financial systems will repeatedly crash, we of course need some kind of mutualization of debt. There is no way around that, that if we want to have global financial markets and the free movement of capital, that we somehow create common insurance devices so that we don't have these completely uneven allocation of the costs of the financial systems that we all benefit from in good times, and so we cannot live with the allocation of the cost of these crises in bad times. Thank you very much.
Okay, so good evening, and thank you also for inviting me today and participate in this important meeting. I have listened to the President's speech, and also my remarks will partly be based on, if it's not out of date, this economic program that the coalition has issued. And what strikes me, both in the President's remarks and in the document, is that on the one hand, you perfectly understand what the problem is and everything that's going on. But on the other hand, that understanding doesn't sit well with several of the positions that are taken in the document or by the coalition. Specifically, I'm speaking of that SYRIZA does not consider an exit from the euro as one of the options, so that's been taken off the table, and also considers the public debt unsustainable and wants to pursue deficit reduction and is looking to raise taxes in various ways. So this past July, Draghi said that the ECB will do whatever it takes to save the euro, presumably meaning that the ECB will support national government liquidity. The problem, as the President recognizes, is that the ECB only grants solvency with strict conditionality. So what Greece needs is for the EU to relax its deficit limit and conditionality from, say, 3% to 7% of GDP, at least. If the EU refuses, then this is going to drastically reduce the policy options in the policy space that the coalition is going to have to pursue sensible policies. There may be some limited things that can be done locally in the short term, but it means high unemployment until the deficit limits are raised. In that case, prosperity requires exiting the euro because the odds of the Merkels, the Montis, the Draghis, and their colleagues making the necessary reforms that would need to be made to the structure of the monetary union are very, very small. There is nothing radical or progressive about obsession with inflation, with deficit hawk type position, with sound money, sound finance. The way that the monetary union was set up, which we all agree is structurally flawed, was not a mistake. It was intended so that nations could not conduct fiscal policy. That, if you look at the ideology of the creators of the EMU, was the intention. And as long as those fiscal policies can't be pursued, then the admirable goals of social justice and full employment and environmental sustainability and so on will not have the tools that you need to achieve them.
And now I'll ask for Professor Ferguson.
Okay, let me just sort of come straight to the point. So we got 4 minutes or so. I think it's very easy to lose sight of just how horrible the situation, not only in Greece, but in much of Europe has now become. And we're kind of used to this. We've sort of gone into it in a slow way, and we're not constantly reminded. But you're now at the stage of folks, middle-class people going through garbage so they can live. I mean, that's not the first time that's happened. There are people in Argentina elsewhere that happened too. And of course, poor people have often gone through garbage so they can live. But it's a really desperate situation. In that respect, Mr. Tsipras' comments about the desperate condition of the country and the way that begins to sort of destroy the political unity are all true. Now, if you ask yourself, how has this happened? I think it's pretty easy to see, right? And again, if you step back from all the stuff about currency unions and things like that, what you basically discover, I think, is relatively simple, which is there was some initial variation in the way individual countries dealt with their banking. But in the end, the banks got control of the policy almost everywhere, and they insisted on getting paid. That was after 2008. That's the first thing. The banks want to get paid, and that has driven almost every element of this crisis in every country at every point, even sometimes by if there's a strong liberal tradition among the rest of the business community. And also, I may add, in some of my own research with Rob Johnson, it turned out, yeah, you could get some resistance depending on the percentage of socialists in your parliament and actually the percentage of your population that voted. There were some mild effects on that, but that's the first thing. Secondly, European elites have, to put it simply, across Europe, been interested in rolling back the welfare state for many years. I mean, I think Alain Parguez's work, largely at this point still, I think, unpublished, on the origins of the European Union, is the best thing going on this. I myself, I well remember a top policymaker of the European Union sitting down about 1998 at a thing I was, and he was explaining, I'm talking just like this, that they wanted to push down the level of wages in Europe and things like that. Then finally, and more recently, I don't think there's any doubt that the core, in the core powers in Europe, Germany, France, in a funny situation that's less and less core every day, or Holland, there's serious interest in buying the periphery, in restructuring it. It was put very nicely to me by one very prominent German economist. He said, in 2 years, these people are going to be begging us for a bailout. And those of you who don't believe my sort of private account, there was the famous Bild Zeitung piece a year or two ago where they said, well, it's about time, where some Germans were, so it's about time the Greeks started selling us some islands, which, that tourism is one thing you can do with a foreign service. Anyway, and for all those reasons, not very much has in fact happened to sort of remedy this combination of austerity. But it is, the austerity, this business is unstable, both in the sense the banks want to get paid, but you're also trying to do it with austerity. So it's unstable in Europe as a whole, as well as in Greece. It really is true if you look at the Great Depression. What you found is this sequence as things go from bad to worse. After 3 or 4 years, the first thing that happens is you get the ins go out, the outs go in. You get a sort of normal cycle. Then you get really strange political forces, as Mr. Tsipras said. You're at that point in Europe. Do it in a second. Just hold on a minute. Yeah. And then you're at that point now. And I think it's time people remember that you have to sort of break away from the doctrines of pay off the banks at any cost. Needs to be dealt with. This is an intellectual failure across the whole of Europe, and it's leading to a political disaster, exactly as Mr. Tsipras said, not only in Greece but here.
We have to go. Thanks. So I'd like to ask Mr. Milios if you've got any responses to those three perspectives, looking at the structural point, looking at the kind of underlying politics behind the design, and then looking at that idea of the actual mechanism by which those sort of incentives are being acted out towards the banking sector and the working class.
Okay. Thank you very much. I agree with a lot of things that were said in this table. And I would like to start from a point raised by the president of SYRIZA, that is that we had a very badly structured euro area. Before the crisis, this structure created two groups of countries. Countries which were developing very fastly. For example, Greece developed at a growth rate which was more than double compared to the one of Germany, and countries which were developing at a low growth rate, but which achieved trade surpluses. The way that we see the whole picture is the instability and the volatility of the financial sector, because this trade balance, these trade surpluses of Germany and the other northern countries were at the same time financial deficits. That is, we had a flow of capital, mostly portfolio investment, but also loan capital, to the fast growing countries, because they were countries of higher growth rate and profit rate, and investors believed that they can gain more if buying shares of Spanish or Portuguese or Greek or Irish companies than of companies in the so-called core of Europe. In the time period 95 to 2008, Greece experienced a real increase in the GDP amounting to 61%, Spain 56%, Ireland 124%, quite contrary to what happened to the more developed European countries. Germany 17.8%, Germany 19.5%, Italy 17.8%, France 30.8%. So we had this imbalance, which was actually a financial imbalance, and which was a very volatile regime. After the crisis, we had a collapse of this flow of capital from the north to the south. I use these terms in a very loose manner. And we had this crisis, and then a new interpretation came that competitiveness can only be described through trade surpluses. a country is competitive when it has a trade surplus, and a country is not competitive if it has a trade deficit. This means that China is very competitive and the United States is not competitive because it has a big trade deficit compared to China. This is the official explanation, and this explanation demands austerity in order to boost exports. Behind this narrative, we say that we have a clear class policy. We have some ruling elites, financial and economic elites, which are very interconnected with the political system, and that have found the crisis as a chance in order to reshape society, in order to suppress the historical needs of the working people. Before the crisis, and I will finish with it, we were talking about the generation of 550 euros, because the minimum wage was 541 euros, and we were, by using this term, the generation of 750, we were saying, we meant that it's a very low salary to enter the labor market, earning only 750 for a European country like Greece. And nowadays, that is only 3 years after this crisis, if a youngster earns 500 euros, she or he must be very satisfied, because we have unemployment of more than 50% among the youth, 26% in the country as a whole, and it keeps growing. Okay.
Yeah, I had one question actually. I just want to follow up next. I just wanted to follow up on a question sort of drawing from all three of the speakers. Given that a lot of this is about structural design, I know Professor Pistol has done a lot of work on how the closer you get to the core of these structures, the kind of legal constraints become a lot more fluid. And I'm curious if, Professor Forse is talking about the idea that the power structures who designed this, designed it with an intent in mind to have some of these outcomes. And that if some of the mechanisms that are being used right now in terms of paying off the banks first, or if those things are things you agree with, or if SYRIZA thinks is happening in Greece, what is the idea for the restructuring of the Eurozone? How does SYRIZA see that actually coming about in a way that doesn't leave that power at the core to cause the structure to be elastic, so that if something happened to Germany, you wouldn't see the same results as you're seeing in these countries, or you're going to see the same types of structures facilitating trade surpluses, as you say, in the core countries. Okay, so
SYRIZA belongs to the European left. That is to the left fraction in the European Parliament, together with other parties of other countries in Europe, as for example Die Linke in Germany, Front de Gauche in France, and so on. And so we have a common program, more or less, part of which is to reshape the role of the structure of the Eurozone, and of course to dramatically change the function of the central bank. We say that the ECB must at last be a lender in the last resort, a proper central bank which plays this role not only for banks but also for sovereigns, that the political regulation of Europe's financial sector has to be put forward. We talk about the necessity of cooperation in order to be able to have a Tobin tax, a European banking legislation modeled on the Glass-Steagall Act model, to cooperate in order to abolish or to contain tax havens, and a public European credit rating agency. concerning the banks, we favor the banking union, but in another way that is in a much broader sense as the European authorities propose, which will allow the participation of nearly all the banks and not only the 200 big banks as it's now scheduled. We favor the bank oversight and recapitalization by this authority, the issuing of Eurobonds, which will be issued by the ECB, the introduction of and this is very important, of a European Fund for Social Development and Solidarity. And also we have other policies concerning growth and comparative advantages of the European Union as a whole and of the specific country.
So I'm going to ask Ms. Dourou in a minute to speak because I know she's got some prepared remarks on the same very question. But before I do, I just wonder if I can get some responses to that. Go around, yeah, very short, for about a minute if that's possible. And I will stop people from now on.
The only, structurally, the way that the monetary union is set up, the only alternative to exiting the euro would be a United States of Europe where you have a fiscal authority at the euro level. Politically, I'm told this is not going to happen. So the question is then, if the necessary reforms are not going to be made, then is an exit on the table, or is that absolutely off the table? No question.
Okay, so that's one question. Ferguson, you got something?
Well, just one comment. An awful lot of the discussions about the Eurozone sort of take it for granted that the sort of Martin Wolf discussion of, well, the core countries are trying to get trade surpluses with the periphery. That's not true, to put it simply. Bluntly, an awful lot of folks in the core are thinking they can balance in the long run by asset sales from the periphery. If you don't understand that, you're not dealing with the heart of this problem. And it is, I once listened only about 6 months ago to a Nobel Prize-winning economist carry on about the trade balancing problem, and then the top German economist for the biggest German bank for many years just contemptuously dismissed the whole discussion. Okay. I got his point. Everybody else needs to get that point too. Okay.
Just very briefly, I agree that the European Central Bank should play the role that is suggested. I think to do so, it needs the political backing of the European people. The question on the table is, I think, whether this can be done only through a fiscal construct a la a super nation state, and I think that is off the table. But I think we could try to think out of the box where there are other ways in which the European people could commit to their common currency and back it in ways that is sustainable, not only for those at the core, but also in the periphery, and I think that's the challenge before us.
Can you expand it? Do you have any suggestions for that, or any kind of any other people you know who've been talking about ways of doing that?
Well, I think sort of Eurobonds can go into one direction, but I think it's basically the political coordination, also the political leadership to mobilize people that this is a common interest if we want to keep the European integration project on track, that we create political forms of backing the currency, and that it's not a national interest of this country helping out another one, but this is a common European project. It's a political question, much more so than a design thing. I think we could come up with a lot of little solutions, but we need the political leadership and will to do so.
Would you like to respond? Okay, first the famous exit question. We are definitely against exit. The plan of the ruling classes and the financial elites in Europe is to redistribute wealth and power to the favor of them, and this is a plan against the working people. If we have another national currency and not the euro, which means that the country will devaluate, let's say, for a percentage of about 50%. This would mean a reduction by 50% of the purchasing power of the working people in international currency, let's say dollars, and this would mean a reduction of the purchasing power of the working people of at least 25% in national currency. And this means that in one moment they will, or in a few months, they will achieve what the program has trying to achieve in 3 or 4 years. Besides, if this method were a very good method for Greece, then it would be also a very good method for Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Spain, and so on. So, if the Greeks devaluated their currency by 50%, the Italians would think that 52 would do, and then the Spaniards would say 55 is better, and the Italians would devaluate by 60%, and the situation would be similar to what happened during the interwar years. That is, we have countries, that is coalitions in quotation marks or without, between the working classes and the ruling elites, the financial elites of each country, combating or being in conflict with the other countries, and this would be catastrophic not only for the European idea of, and I agree with you that it's a political matter and we have to move in this way by changing the political relation of forces all over Europe, and if SYRIZA does this change in Greece, this will be a positive domino effect in all other countries, but it will be a distraction, a catastrophe for the country itself.
Well, I think that leads nicely into the next little talk we're going to have from Mr. Dourou talking about the challenge of democracy in the Eurozone. Is that right? We've got another translator coming in, so please be patient. Thank you.
It could be also good evening for me. Thank you for being here. I feel the need to share something more personal. When I was young, 24 years old, I wanted to come here and study at Columbia. I found a scholarship, but the amount of money was not the proper one. So I went to the University of Essex for studying political analysis and subjecting my dissertation to the Argentinian philosopher Ernesto Laclau. And believe me, it's very important for me that I am tonight here with you, not as a student, but addressing to you and try to support our different view on behalf of SYRIZA for another European zone, for another European Union. Believe me, for me it's very important. Thank you very much. The other is that I'm complaining the last months for the economy. I'm fed up for the economy, for the fiscal jargon like deficit, the surplus, GDP, which seems to win the political analysis of what happens in my country, what happens in the European Union. I think that you stressed that it lacks the political will. Still, I'm obliged to pick up, in my turn, economical example. For example, the European budget 2014-2020, and from the example of the European budget to end up to the crisis of democracy, to end up for the lack of political will actually is not only the different fiscal signs. And to share another personal information, in our coalition, I'm in the same thread with Alexis Tsipras. So in order to show to you that I obey to him, I return back to Greeks. So I will speak in Greek for 3 minutes. There's going to be a translator. And I will try to explain by picking up an economical example how I understand, how we understand, the crisis in the European zone. Okay? Ένα χαρακτηριστικό παράδειγμα του πόσο αδιέξοδοι και πόσο μακριά από τους πραγματικούς προβληματισμούς και τις προσδοκίες των Ευρωπαίων πολιτών είναι σήμερα η πολιτική συζήτηση στην Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση είναι αυτό του ευρωπαϊκού προϋπολογισμού.
A great example of how far dead end and how far from real problems and expectations of European citizens is today's political dialogue in the European Union is the example of the European budgeting process.
Το μπλοκάρισμα του προϋπολογισμού για την περίοδο 2014-2020 είναι λοιπόν αποκαλυπτικό του αδιεξόδου που έχει περιέλθει το ευρωπαϊκό εγχείρημα.
The budget gridlock for 2014 to 2020 reveals the impasse that the European venture faces.
Η γερμανική αιμονή
German insistence.
It was prepared back in Athens. Στη δημοσιονομική αυστηρότητα.
In fiscal discipline.
Η βρετανική επιμονή στην περαιτέρω μείωση του προπολογισμού, που ας μην ξεχνάμε πρόκειται για μόλις το 1%.
British insistence in further reductions of the budget. And let's not forget we are talking just for 1%.
Και η αιμονή της Γαλλίας στη διατήρηση του ύψους των αγροτικών επιδοτήσεων θέτουν ένα εξόχως αποκαρδιωτικό πείμα.
On top of French insistence on protecting agricultural subsidies, paint a very disappointing picture.
Όμως αυτή η προοπτική δεν είναι νομοτελειακή.
However, this is not the end.
Απλά όσο is not dead. Απλά όσο περνάει ο καιρός γίνεται όλο και περισσότερο ορατή.
Simply it becomes more and more visible.
Ειδικά δεν φαίνεται η απαραίτητη πολιτική βούληση της ευρωπαϊκής ηγεσίας και της γερμανικής, ειδικότερα για αλλαγή ρότας.
Especially when we clearly see the lack of political will of the European leadership, and especially the German ones, to change direction.
Τι χρειάζεται σήμερα η Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση,
What the European Union needs today, what the Eurozone needs today.
Εκείνο που χρειάζεται σήμερα η Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση είναι μια στρατηγική δημοσίων επενδύσεων σε απασχόληση, υποδομές, εκπαίδευση, έρευνα.
What really needs European Union today is a strategy of public investment in jobs, infrastructure, education, research.
Αυτά και μόνο αυτά μπορούν να είναι τα οχήματα μιας προοδευτικής ατζέντας.
Only these are the vehicles of a progressive agenda.
Για να ξαναβρει η Ευρωζώνη, η Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση, την προωθητική δύναμη των πρώτων ετών, την αξιοπιστία της έναντι των κοινωνιών της και των λαών της.
For European Union to recover its lost vigor and credibility in the face of its people.
Στο πλαίσιο λοιπόν ενός ευρύτερου μακράς πνοής σχεδίου οικονομικής και κοινωνικής ανασυγκρότησης, θα μου επιτρέψετε να quote τον Etienne Balibar.
In the context of a wider long-term plan for economic and social restructuring, let me quote Etienne Balibar.
Τι λέει ο Etienne Balibar? Λέει ότι σήμερα βιώνουμε μία κρίση της αντιπροσωπευτικής δημοκρατίας.
Today we live a crisis of representative democracy.
Χρειαζόμαστε μια αναγέννηση της έννοιας της δημοκρατίας, την οικοδόμηση αντιεξουσιών.
We need a renaissance of the democracy. We need to construct counterpowers.
Αυτό μας είπε τις προάλλες στην Αθήνα και επισήμανε ότι βρισκόμαστε σε μια διαδικασία, τσιτάρω τον Etienne Balibar, αποδημοκρατικοποίησης των ευρωπαϊκών κοινωνιών και σκιαγραφεί με αυτόν τον τρόπο τον δρόμο που πρέπει να ακολουθήσουμε.
That's what Etienne Balibar told us in Athens recently, and he said that we are in a process, and I quote, of de-democratization of our societies, and basically he showed us what is the roadmap that we need to follow.
Έτσι, ο δρόμος πρέπει να περνά από δημόσιες επενδύσεις, αλλά την ίδια στιγμή πρέπει να ενδυναμώνει δημοκρατικούς και αντιπροσωπευτικούς θεσμούς, πρέπει να αναζητά τη δημόσια λογοδοσία των ευρωπαϊκών θεσμών έναντι των πολιτών της Ευρώπης.
In a nutshell, the road should go through public investments and strengthening of the democratic institutions, representation institutions, and at the same time should search for a public accountability of those institutions in the eyes of the European citizens.
Με άλλα λόγια και κλείνοντας, περισσότερο από ποτέ η Ευρώπη ή θα αναμορφωθεί και θα ανασχεδιαστεί με ένα ριζοσπαστικό τρόπο, που οι αριθμοί δεν θα αποκλείουν τους θεσμούς, ή απλά, πολύ φοβάμαι, ότι στο επόμενο τραπέζι θα πρέπει να συζητήσουμε μετά την Ευρώπη, μετά την Ευρωζώνη, τι θα σβήσει.
Bottom line, Europe either should reform and redesign in a truly radical way, or will simply fade away. And in the next seminar, we're going to talk about Europe after. Thanks for your attention.
So I have a couple of questions on that I wanted to ask the other members of the panel. So first of all, I'd like to ask Professor Pistor just about the extent to which the proposal of kind of a radical democratic re-envisioning and the reliance on a coalition of sort of other left parties in Europe fits with your research on the way that financial reform is conducted, or whether or not you see that as a possibility of real meaningful reform in that context, without, or what mechanisms would need to be sort of utilized to get that reform through that process in the European Parliament. And second of all, Professor Forstater, just in response to Professor Ferguson's comment about asset sales being primarily the way that this is, that the core countries are trying to sort of extract some type of resources from the periphery countries, whether or not that fits with the same narrative that requires fiscal union, whether or not you think that would be an alternative narrative to the idea that if countries left the Eurozone, there would be a competitive devaluation cycle, and whether or not that might be some type of countervailing force there.
So let me just make a general remark. I think it's really important to put the normative agenda about what Europe and European integration is all about back on the table. So it's not about the euro. We don't really care about the euro. We only care about the euro if its breakup or collapse could actually torpedo the European integration project and the basic values for which it stands. It's democratic self-determination in a basic way. And so I think trying to mobilize the people to think about the normative basis of Europe is an important thing. Whether we can do this exclusively from a leftist perspective, I would be skeptical about if I look at current political distribution in Europe. So I think we need a broad base, but for protecting these norms, and I think this does require some more headways, radical restructuring of the financial system as we currently have it. So this has to go hand in hand, but I would try to broaden the base to get it through, because otherwise this will be a minority position that will be voted against.
So let me just say that because of the strict time limits to our comments, I had to forego saying all of the things with which I agree with the coalition, the statement, the party, and all those wonderful things. We don't have time. So I just had to get down to what was the issue that I found challenging, and that was what I stated previously. So one of the things that I think is really interesting is that you have in Germany today over 100 local currencies, complementary currencies of various types. And so we're going to, on the one hand, take a very, there's no discussion of exiting the euro, but on the other hand, at the level of people and of local communities, they're finding that their only option is, and this is in Germany, to launch their own local currencies, their own complementary currencies. So I don't know. I mean, I'm fine with that. We can. It's kind of on the one hand, you have this trend towards a greater federation. On the other hand, it's going to be increasing localism, and so I don't know exactly how these two forces are going to be reconciled. Maybe they can coexist.
Do you want any response now? Maybe I'll take
I guess the only thing I'd say is what I often say, which is if you want a happy ending, for sure see a Disney movie.
Professor Milios, do you have any responses to those points?
Well, my response will have the form of a statement, rather, that the way I see the financial system is more a discipline mechanism and less a mechanism of, or a sphere of mere speculation.
Punishment. Punishment was.
Discipline mechanism is something different from punishment. Because it's not only punishment, it's also the opposite of it. That is giving credit to somebody for being, for complying with the norms of the system. Credit in both meanings of the word. So, because I regard the financial system to be a core element of the system that we live in, of capitalism, in the way that the university is a core element and a core structure of this system, I think that the only way out is to subsume the financial system to the social needs and to change it by having this direction and this strategy. In this way, I perceive what you described as 100 or 80 or I don't know what local currencies in Germany, which are more in a way out of the currency, and this means also of the financial system, and less another currency in the true sense of the word. So we have to support initiatives that want to surpass the commodity, the profit, the way the banks function. We have to approve what Occupy Wall Street says, that we are 99%, and we have to find other norms. But as soon as, since we live in this system, and since these initiatives are only some small steps at the border of what's really happening in the economy, I say again, as said before, that the major issue is to change the political terrain, that is the relation of forces on the political level. And we believe in SYRIZA that a government of the left will be the first decisive step, not only for our country, but also for Europe as a whole.
Can I just ask one last question, follow-up, and then we'll probably call it a day for this panel. Just in regards to the idea of national asset sales and that being a way to use this discipline mechanism you're talking about, is there a particular policy or structure that SYRIZA thinks is a way to either reverse that trend or prevent that from being a way that financial discipline can be used in the future? Because even if from my perspective, even if you have Eurobonds, even if you have other mechanisms for some common system of social finance throughout the European Union, you may still have a situation like you have, for example, in this country, where individual states have balanced budget issues and have to be forced to deal with public asset reductions or things like that. So I'm curious if you see a way, not just subsuming the financial sector, but preventing that type of privatization.
By the way, that's what Argentina was doing before it went off the fixed exchange rate. They were, selling off national assets.
Okay. First of all, starting from the second comment, I regard a fixed exchange rate area to be something crucially different compared to a single currency area. And the failure of the European EMU project, that is the Economic and Monetary Union in the early 90s, was due to the fact that it was a fixed exchange rate area and not a single currency area. Second, there is something very peculiar in the case of Greece, that during the previous era, during the PASOK era of the late 90s, they have sold practically everything, or at least the most of it. That is why if you follow the Greek agenda, they are talking about real estate, about buildings and real estate of the state that is going to be privatized. So we are in a very bad situation comparing the degrees of making policy that the Greek state and a progressive government would have. And in this aspect, we are on the same camp with the rest of the European left, which says that we need to have an effective public sector, and also that certain goods shall be considered as public goods and not as commodities. For example, water, electricity, healthcare, and social security, and so on. That these sectors cannot be privatized because, according to our values, they shall not be commodities but common goods.
Do you have anything to add?
She told me to...
You know, the politicians always in order to the professor to help. Obey.
She told me to explain to you a certain aspect of our program, which is also on the internet. If you Google SYRIZA economic program, you are going to have access to it, which has a perspective of emergency and speaks about the first 10 days or the first 10 months, and also a perspective of a broader reshaping society, and also speaks about the 10 years of change in Greece and Europe.
Well, I think we'll call it there. We'll have a few minutes break. If you could please keep it very short. If you need to get something from the back or go to the bathroom, which is just out to your outside to your left, and we'll try and be back in about 5 minutes and start the next panel. So thank you very much for everybody who participated.